Hello everybody, welcome to Dungeons & Drams. This week, TTRPG creators all across YouTube and Instagram and everywhere else are going to be creating content for Kraken Week. Now this is a fun little thing that Ginny D and Pointy Hat organized for all of us to kind of join in. Basically the idea, it doesn't have to be Krakens, but it does have to be like an underwater, oceanic kind of concept, and really anything that you want to do. So I thought, let's start off with a big guy. Let's start off with the Kraken. But I'm not going to do like, hey, this is a Kraken, this is what it does, because that's been done to death. What I wanted to show you guys was how during the campaign that I ran, the Lands of Dominion, I incorporated a Kraken, a CR 23, over 400 hit points, legendary creature that can fling you 60 feet into the first tier of play. And how we did this with a whole lot of little hints and kind of foreshadowing that you can use in your game. Now the story will contain some spoilers for up to episode 19 of the Lands of Dominion, so if you're in the middle of watching that, you might want to turn away and come back to this later. Now the story started off in a little town called Alowith Harbor. Now Alowith Harbor is kind of your perfect little starting town. You have your general store so that they can go shopping, you've got your inn called the Drunken Seal because awesome. And then there was an herbalist and like a cleric going around talking about the god of the ocean, all this other stuff. Now that cleric's important. His name was Gonathan, like Jonathan, except a little bit more high maintenance. So Gonathan would go around and he kind of earned this reputation as a guy who could predict when ships would sink. And it didn't happen a ton, but he would like claim that Uros, who's the god of the ocean in this world, Uros spoke to him and said that this was going to happen. Now here's the thing. Despite the obvious connections that you might make of like, how does this guy always know? I mean, gods are real in this world. So for a cleric to say something like that and say he's talking to a god and then have it happen isn't really out of the question. Not to mention he's just living in the seaside village and everything could kind of be chalked up to some sort of a storm or a natural disaster. Now I took care to establish, even just right from level 1, that the players were going to be going on a ship in order to kind of go chase after a bad guy and go from one continent to another. And I actually had them meet Gonathan a couple of times. In fact, Gonathan helped them to save a child that they had rescued who had become either unconscious or potentially dead and brought him back to life. So I mean, Gonathan was a good guy in the eyes of the player. Now, a few days passed in game, the players got on the ship and then they took off. And there were a couple of little side quests, roll some random dice, random encounters, etc., etc. But then they woke up one morning in the middle of a storm. And not only was there a storm, but there were the Sahuagin, which is how I'm going to pronounce them. I think that's how they're said.
Sahuagin
on the boat, and they were attacking the players. There was a hole in the bottom of the boat. They had swum up through. The players woke up to pretty much tridents like pointed at their face.
Molly, the noise of the trident hitting the bed also wakes you up, and you see a similar sight above you. A being with murderous intent in its eyes plunges a trident down towards your chest.
Oh my god. This is how it began.
And the players were able to get out of the situation. They killed the Sahuagin, went up a couple of floors, had a couple more encounters, and found themselves on the deck. As you could imagine, when they got up to the top deck, they saw a fight. They saw Sahuagin, who were fighting the NPCs that they had kind of gotten into little relationships with. They've been talking to them for a few days. And so they really wanted to save these NPCs. However, then there's the tentacles, right? Because the Kraken's got to be there somehow. Kraken has the tentacles over the side of the ship and is randomly plucking NPCs and throwing them off the ship. 60 feet's a long way when you're talking about off the side of a ship, especially in the middle of a storm, and in this case it was early morning and like nighttime, so it was very dark. And frankly, the audience who was watching it loved that people were just getting plucked and tossed, but the players, they were like, uh-oh, I've been talking to this person, now they're just dead.
A 15 does not succeed. So he is he's grasped by these tentacles, and he is thrown 60 feet out towards sea.
Oh my god.
That is more feet than I would care for.
So you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you see him kind of fly out, but you actually lose track of him just because of the darkness and the storm, but you hear the splash in the water. That didn't go well for him at all.
So I used the Kraken not to attack the players, who would almost certainly die, although I wasn't against that if one of them got a little overzealous or overestimated their abilities, but I used it to kill NPCs that the players had learned to like. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is a fully unique idea. The idea of a Kraken attacking a ship on the sea is probably the most obvious way to use them. But where you could potentially use this in your own campaign is the idea of the foreshadowing, and this is what I want you to take away from this. I actually began the entire campaign with this one battle as the entire core concept. I was like, I want this to start off with a Kraken fight. So, how am I going to make that happen? Well, in the case of Gonathan, he being the cleric of Uros, the sea god, he had this little deal, right? Whenever there was a reason to, he would sacrifice ships and treasure and all of that stuff to Uros by attracting the Kraken to it. And he would do this through the use of a magical stone. And he could enchant these stones themselves. It was just like a mundane stone, but he would enchant it to every few hours it would pulse. And when it pulsed, it would attract the Kraken, almost like a homing beacon. And over time, the Kraken would always catch up to the boats and, destroy them. And you could almost always blame everything on a natural disaster or a storm at sea that nobody even experienced. Easy enough. Now, there were several opportunities for the players to have caught on to this whole thing, because I don't believe in just punishing them with absolutely no recourse, right? That's kind of half the fun. So, in this case, they could have infiltrated the church for whatever reason. Don't really need a reason. You had a rogue in the group. He could have been pokey. And had he gone into the cathedral or the church, he would have found some notes and possibly even some stones about this enchantment and been able to maybe put two and two together. Maybe they could have called in the authorities or maybe had a fight with Gonathan. Either way, it could have gone a whole different way. Now their next chance, on the day of their ship leaving, they actually saw Gonathan coming out of the ship.
As you're talking, you actually notice down on the boat, you hear some noise, and you see Gonathan is kind of coming out of the lower part of the ship. He's coming from onto the quarterdeck, and he's walking off the ship, and he waves over to Squall. Yeah, I know, he gets around now. And
I was gonna say that dude is everywhere.
And when they kind of saw him, they asked him about it, and he said, basically, I'm blessing the ship. He's a cleric of the god of the ocean. It's not unreasonable, and nobody chose to roll insight. So that happened. Next, there was this pulse that was happening every few hours. Had somebody had a high enough passive insight or passive perception, maybe I would have let them kind of sense something. But also nobody thought to roll Arcana, which why would there? There was no real catalyst for that. That would have been a much tougher one, but it could have happened. Lastly, they poked around in the captain's quarters, which is actually where Gonathan hid the stone, because he had a little thing with the captain of the Mighty Maiden, which is the name of the ship. He had this little thing, and he wanted to make it personal, so had he found it, he would have known that their ship was screwed. But also, had the players been sneaking around in the captain's quarters, which almost happened, I was really, really hoping. The rogue had said he wanted to poke around in the captain's quarters, and the rest of the players, I believe, convinced him not to do it. So, had he gone in there, he probably would have found the stone, maybe would have been able to figure out what it was, but now that puts him in a weird roleplay situation. Why was he in the captain's quarters? How did he find this thing in the first place? And he's got to talk his way out of it. All in all, the Kraken destroyed the ship, and the players went down into a lifeboat. They were able to kind of drift away, but right before that happened, the captain actually jumped off the ship, hung onto the side of the lifeboat.
Isn't the captain supposed to go down with the ship? Isn't that
right?
an old seafaring
That's
rule?
right.
Yeah.
I think Squall needs to be the bait for the freaking Mr. The Kraken.
So is Noblets knocking Squall overboard? I'm not opposed to it. I look around to the party and like guys, what do we do? What do we do? Oh yeah,
All
I'm
right.
just gonna. Can I just push him overboard?
So you can make a shove attack, and you do
Dang.
successfly. So he
okay,
goes.
I was
He
getting
goes.
a
In,
little nervous.
he goes in the
I don't
water.
want any part of this.
So he goes in the water, but he's holding onto the side of the boat.
Yeah, I'm just gonna call down you're the captain, dude. Go down with the ship, bitch.
I like that you added bitch at the end. That really.
And then I end my turn.
Another fun moment of roleplay, which is also kind of funny because a couple days later, the dragon that rescued the players, which is a whole nother story, was essentially bribed by that captain to keep those players safe for reasons that we never found out about. All of this to tell you, don't be afraid to use high CR monsters in your games. They can be really unforgettable and very dangerous and kind of let your players know that you're doing this seriously. And it's a lot of fun. They'll remember it. So, thank you everybody for joining me here on Dungeons & Drams. Make sure to check out the other TTRPG creators that you follow this whole week for their Kraken Week releases. I think it's going to be really fun and I'll be checking in on a lot of them. All right, thank you everybody and have a great rest of your day. Cheers.